The station clock struck midnight, its heavy brass gears groaning like an old man's joints. Every tick was a mechanical heartbeat, thumping against the hollow ribs of the station. Outside, the winter air was a physical weight, thick enough to frost the lungs with every breath. I am the station master here, a man who has spent 40 years watching people leave and others arrive. But tonight, the silence felt different. It wasn't the peaceful quiet of a sleeping city. It was the expectant, heavy stillness of a tomb. I took my lantern, its flame flickering a nervous orange against the dark wood of the station walls, and began my final rounds. My boots made a rhythmic, hollow sound against the polished stone. Thud, 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 echoing to the vaulted ceiling like a heartbeat in an empty chest. I stopped for a moment, listening. In 40 years, you learn the language of the tracks. You hear the expansion of the steel, the scuttle of the mice, the distant vibration of a freight train miles away. But tonight, the tracks were mute. It was as if the world had held its breath, waiting for a permission it hadn't yet received. I turned toward platform 4. This part of the station was older than the rest, a place where the modern LED signs often flickered and died, and where the air always felt 5 degrees colder. As I stepped on the platform, a river of blue-tinted mist was flowing over the rusted iron tracks, swirling around the Victorian pillars. This wasn't the damn fog of a riverbank. It was a silver shroud that seemed to glow from within, carrying the scent of things long forgotten: ozone, wet wool, and old tobacco. In the center of that mist, sitting perfectly still on a weathered wooden bench, was a woman. My heart skipped a beat. No one should have been there. The last train had departed hours ago, leaving the tracks to the rats and the wind. She sat with a posture that belonged to a different era. Spine straight, chin tilted slightly upward, her presence commanding a strange, mournful respect from the shadows themselves. She didn't look like a vagrant or a lost traveler. She looked like a queen waiting for a carriage that was 80 years overdue. I approached slowly, the golden light of my lantern cutting to fog to reveal a figure from a different century. She was elegant, dressed in a heavy wool coat from the 1940s, a small hat perched on her head with a fine lace veil obscuring the top half of her face. Beside her sat a small leather suitcase, its corner scuffed and gray with age. It was the kind of luggage people used when they didn't know if they were coming back. Attached to the handle was a paper travel tag, yellowed and brittle, fluttering in a draft that didn't exist. I could just make out the faded ink. London to coast, August 1945. She looked like a black and white photograph that had somehow stepped into the three-dimensional world, smelling faintly of dried lavender and stale gunpowder. As I got closer, I noticed the texture of her coat. The wool was heavy and coarse, the kind of fabric made to endure the rationing of wartime. Yet it was kept immaculately clean, as if she had been brushing the dust off it every day for a lifetime. Her presence felt dense, like she was more real than the bench she sat upon. "Madam," I whispered, my voice cracking in the frost. "The last train left long ago. The station is closing for the night." She didn't move. Her hands, encased in delicate silk gloves, were folded tightly over her lap. On her left ring finger, a gold band shone with a brilliance that seemed impossible for its age, as if it had been polished every hour for 80 years. She finally spoke, but her voice didn't come from her throat. It sounded like the scratchy playback of an old gramophone record, thin and vibrating with a haunting, melodic sorrow. "He is coming," she said. "He promised that when the war was over, he would take the first train home. I was here to see him off, and I am here to bring him back. The tickets were bought in a world that no longer exists, but the destination remains the same." Her words hung in the air, refusing to dissipate like normal breath. I looked into her eyes through the veil. She didn't see the modern vending machines or the digital clocks. She saw 1945. In that moment, a vision flickered into my own mind, triggered by her presence. The modern station began to peel away like old wallpaper. I saw the platform as it was then, filled with the roar of steam, the smell of coal smoke, and hundreds of young men in olive drab uniforms. I saw a younger version of her, beautiful and tearful, clutching the hand of a handsome soldier with a kit bag slung over his shoulder. The engine's whistle screamed, a sound of parting and pain that vibrated in my very marrow. The soldier leaned out the window as the train began to roll, shouting over the din, "Evelyn, don't cry. I'll be back by the next spring. Wait for me right here." The memory was so vivid, I could feel the heat from the steam engine and the grit of the coal dust in my eyes. Then, as quickly as it had appeared, the vision snapped back to the cold, sterile reality of the present. "His name was Arthur," she continued, a single tear escaping the veil and vanishing before it hit the floor. "He was a sergeant. He liked poetry and the way the sea looked in the morning. People told me his train was hit during the final push. They told me the tracks were destroyed and no one survived the wreck. They told me he would never return. But what do they know of love? Love knows how to wait. Love doesn't keep a watch. It keeps a promise. I have sat on this bench through 14 station masters. Young man, you are just the latest to tell me to go home." I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the winter. 14 station masters? That would mean she had been here since before I was born. "Evelyn," I said, using her name for the first time. "It's been 80 years. The war ended a lifetime ago. The world has changed. Look at the tracks. They aren't even the same gauge anymore." I reached out to touch her shoulder, to offer some human comfort, but my hand passed straight through the wool of her coat. There was no resistance, only a deep, sucking chill that felt like the void between stars. My lantern flame turned blue and nearly died. She turned her head toward me, and for a second, the veil lifted. Her face was a map of 1,000 heartbreaks, yet her eyes were as bright as a girl's on her wedding night. "Time is a circle, station master," she whispered. "For you, it moves forward like an arrow. For us, it is a station where the train is always just about to arrive." Suddenly, the station transformed completely. The flickering electric lights died out, replaced by the warm, flickering glow of gas lamps. The digital signs vanished, and wooden boards with hand-painted destinations appeared in their place. The air filled with the pungent, heavy scent of burning wood and ozone. Deep within the tunnel, a light appeared. It wasn't a steady, white beam of a modern locomotive. It was a pulsing, sickly yellow glow, accompanied by the heavy, rhythmic chuff-chuff-chuff of a steam piston that sounded like a giant breathing in the dark. A ghostly train, a skeleton of iron and ash, pulled into station with a screech of phantom brakes that shattered the silence of the night. The carriages were translucent, glowing with a soft, ethereal moonlight through the windows. I could see the whispering shadows of thousands of soldiers, their faces pressed against the glass. They weren't scary. They just looked tired, like men who've been traveling for a very, very long time. The door of the lead car creaked open, and a figure stepped out into the mist. It was a young man, his uniform crisp and his brass buttons gleaming. He looked exactly as he did in the vision. A boy frozen in 1945, untouched by the decades. He stepped onto the platform, his boots making no sound on the stone. He looked around, confused for a moment, until his eyes landed on the bench. He smiled, a look of pure, radiating relief, and held out his hand. "Evelyn," he called out. His voice was clear and young, cutting through the ghostly fog. Evelyn stood up as she moved toward him. The years began to fall away from her like autumn leaves in a gale. Her bent back straightened, the wrinkles on her hands smoothed into porcelain skin, and her gray hair turned back to a rich, glossy chestnut right before my eyes. Her heavy wool coat transformed into a light summer dress, the one she had worn the day he left. She picked up her suitcase, which now looked brand new, and turned to look at me. For a split second, she was a girl of 19 again, glowing with a light that pushed back the shadows of the station. "You see?" she whispered, her voice now as clear as a bell. "I told you he would come. The 11 p.m. to the coast is never late. It just takes the long way around. She stepped toward him, her hand sliding perfectly into his. The moment they touched, a wave of warmth washed over the platform. Smelling of roses and seaside air, they turned together and stepped onto the train. The young sergeant looked at me and gave a sharp, grateful salute. The engine let out one final, triumphant blast of its whistle, a sound of joy that seemed to echo across the entire city. Then, with a sudden surge of silver mist, the train accelerated into the darkness of the tunnel and vanished into the folds of history. When the sun rose the next morning, Platform 4 was empty. There was no mist, no ghosts, and no suitcase. The modern electric lights were back on, humming with their usual dull drone. But as I walked past the wooden bench to finish my shift, I saw something that wasn't there before. Lying on the seat was a single, fresh red rose, perfectly bloomed and dew-kissed. It was wrapped in a scrap of yellowed newspaper dated September 1945, with a headline that read, "Victory! Our boys are coming home." I picked up the rose, and the scent of lavender and salt air filled my senses one last time. I felt a peace I hadn't known in 40 years of service. I went back to my office, sat at my desk, and opened my heavy leather logbook. My hand was steady as I picked up my pen to write the final entry of my career. I didn't write about delays or maintenance. I wrote, December 24th, Platform 4. All passengers accounted for. The final connection has been made. Everyone has finally made a home. I closed the book, hung up my keys, and walked out into morning light, leaving the station to the living, knowing that the dead were finally where they belonged, in each other's arms.